tonight, this is really exciting to have this event, and Todd asked me to start with a poem I had about Jim Harrison. So this is it's called Wednesday Morning. I think it's from my last book, These Creatures of a Day. Wednesday Morning. It's been over a decade, and I'm still unable to write that poem called Wednesday Morning. The one about sitting at a picnic table with a mug of cold coffee and your new book of poems. You were still alive then, across the river in your green studio with a rapture of rattlesnakes and peonies slumping to the ground in beauty like Lazarus dreaming. It was cold, so I circled the yard to warm up, let the goats out, went to the basement for a trunk marked winter clothes, and found my dad's wool hat. He was across some other river, the same one you now have crossed, along with your peonies and a generation of snakes, and so many others, more every year. I tried once to float this river, but the dead so outweighed the living. My boat listed precariously to starboard, and I couldn't hold the rudder, which was this pen. And back at that picnic table with its empty mug, book of poems, spruce needles and bird shit, and a journal that holds its blank pages like a heart holds on to its pain. A dozen years later, and here I am, another Wednesday morning at a table in the new sunroom with the red buds of the lilac, wearing fresh gloves of snow, and the chickens beneath the feeders, waiting for the sparrows to knock a few seeds down to them. And I try again to hold this pen, waiting for much the same thing. Okay. So I'm going to bring up the Elk River Arts and Lectures Executive Director to get the rest of the show going. So help me welcome Yetta Stein.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. This is so pleasant to have kind of the best of Livingston and beyond all in one room. If you don't know, Elk River Arts and Lectures is an organization devoted to fostering and supporting the literary arts here in Park County. We host a number of wonderful programs, including this lecture series. Many thanks to everyone who helped make this event happen, Mark being one of them, Andrea, who run and manage this fabulous bookstore. Special thanks to Jamie Potenberg, Jim Harrison's daughter, and Marianne Vollers, who set up all the cheese and wine. Yes, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. As Mark said, I'm Yetta Stein. I'm our organization's new executive director. And a major perk of this job is getting to hang out with poets. This week, I was lucky enough to watch two Park County poets, Max Yortzberg and Earl Craig, both who are here tonight, teach poetry to fourth grade students at Eastside Elementary. This is one of our Poetry in the Classroom program. It's in its 5th season. And the students, I truly don't think have ever been more excited to write poems, both together and individually. When asked to brainstorm what poetry is, one student said, "In a sea, no sharks, calming down." Unprompted. Crazy. Our Poetry in the Classroom program was created to foster and nurture this town's literary heritage, and today we're here to hear about the nexus of that heritage, a man who many consider integral to our history, to why this place is now not only a town composed of and by writers, but a town made up of artists. I bet if I asked you all to raise your hands, you all would identify at least as a bit creative. While considered the master of the novella, Jim Harrison was known for saying poetry meant the most to him. He called himself a poet and nothing else. And I believe him when he said that. In one poem called Another Country, Harrison writes, "I love these raw, moist dawns with 1,000 birds you hear but can't quite see in the mist. My old alien body is a foreigner, struggling to get into another country. The loon call makes me shiver. Back at the cabin, I see a book, and I am not quite sure what that is." There's a lot to say about the legend of Jim Harrison, but there's perhaps more to say about the man, Jim Harrison. And so tonight we'll hear from and celebrate the next generation of Livingston's literary heritage, Todd Goddard, who wrote Devouring Time, which is an audacious and expansive biography about Jim Harrison. Goddard grew up in the Philadelphia area. He earned his bachelor's degree from NYU, a JD from the University Connecticut School of Law, where he served as editor-in-chief of the Connecticut Journal of International Law. He also has a PhD in literary studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Busy. Selfishly, we are also very lucky to have Todd on the board of Elk River Arts and Lectures. His expertise, kindness, and vision for the future heritage of Livingston remains invaluable and ever present. And if you ever hear anyone complaining about their commute or that they had to drive in from the valley tonight or drive it over from Bozeman, know that Todd is an associate professor of literary studies at Utah Valley University, meaning that he's often traveling from Utah to Montana. That's his commute, so no complaining. Tonight, Todd will be in conversation with Joseph Bednarik, who's the co-publisher at Copper Canyon Press. And Joseph served as Jim Harrison's poetry editor since the 1990s. He's also the co-editor of One Man Boat, the George Hitchcock Reader, and the Sumac Reader. Joseph drove all the way to Montana from Port Townsend, Washington. We're so grateful to have him here tonight. Harrison very specifically selected Copper Canyon as his press in the hopes that his collections would remain in print long after he was gone, and it's so beautiful to know that that's true tonight. With that, please help me welcome Todd and Joseph to the stage.
I just want to say what an honor it is to be here in this room in particular with so many of Jim Harrison's friends and family members and devoted readers. So thank you to Mark and Elk River and Andrea and Eral for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's truly an honor. Thank you.
Tell me, baby.
What am I doing?
You're doing a reading.
We're gonna start with the reading?
Start with the reading.
We didn't rehearse this.
We absolutely rehearsed this.
So I thought about getting up here and doing just skipping the talk and doing an interpretive dance of the biography, but Mark thought that was a terrible idea and thought he'd send everyone running for the doors. So, okay, we're gonna have a conversation. I'm gonna start out with the reading. So just to set the stage, just the beginning of the first chapter, it's called The Legend of Little Jimmy. It takes place in begins in November 2003 with a pretty significant and infamous event when Jim flew to France for a 37-course lunch. He wrote about it, called A Really Big Lunch for the New Yorker. It became infamous. A lot of people know about it, but I just want to set the stage. That's when this is happening. So on a cool, misty morning in November 2003, a hungry Jim Harrison paced the gardens of a manor house in the medieval village of Saint-Père-sous-Vézelay in Burgundy, anticipating the beginning of a 37-course lunch. I'm not going to do his voice, okay? Life is a near-death experience, he later writes, and our devious minds will do anything to make it interesting. Despite being 65 years old and suffering from painful bouts of gout, hypertension, and kidney stones, he'd soon add chronic shingles, post-herpetic neuralgia, type 2 diabetes, spondylolisthesis, spinal stenosis, and hip arthritis to the list. Jim had traveled from his home in Livingston, Montana, to Paris 2 weeks earlier. Devouring Time, a phrase from a poem Jim liked to quote by Shakespeare, would eventually do its worst. At noon that day, 12 invited attendees crowded into the Michelin-starred restaurant of Marc Minot, L'Espérance. The grounds included the restaurant, the hotel, a small gift shop, and park-like gardens of flowers and herbs crisscrossed by little streams and walking paths. The restaurant's dining room overlooked the gardens, and that morning it had been amply appointed with fresh flowers. It lay just a few miles from Vézelay's cobblestone streets and its Benedictine monastery, now the Basilica of Sainte-Marie-Madeleine. Jim thought the village and the cathedral the loveliest in France. The attendees included Jim's friends Guy de la Baudin, a French count, and restaurateur and writer Peter Lewis, plus a mix of gourmands and chefs, mostly French. The organizer of the event was Jim's friend, Gérard Oberle, an unquestionable genius, Jim thought him, ad book dealer, writer, and scholar of French food who resided in a manor house in nearby Nivernais. For this hours-long meal, Oberle had crafted a menu drawn from 17 cookbooks published between 1654 and 1823. As the diners filed in, Chef Minot, a brilliant but tempestuous chef of the old school, stood by wearing a crisp white uniform and a blue apron. His job and that of his wife, Francoise, along with 39 members of his staff, was to keep the 37 courses coming throughout the day. The first service of the lunch began with Minot exclaiming simply, "Courage," or "Courage," as Jim would write, followed by a grand assortment of nose-to-tail dishes, tartines of foie gras with truffles and lard, a velvet cream of squab with cucumbers, served with cock crust fritters, oysters and cream of camembert on toast, a jellied loaf of poultry on sorrel cream, a tart of calf's brain with shelled peas, and an omelet of sea urchin. Later came a stew of suckling pig, a warm tureen of hare with preserved plums, and a poached eel with chicken wing tips and testicles and a pool of tarragon butter. Courage, indeed. A selection of celebrated French wines, Jim would note, rained down on us as if from the world's best garden sprinkler. By one account, 19 different bottles. Before departing Montana, Jim had queried editor Deborah Treisman at the New Yorker about the possibility of a write-up for the magazine. "I'm going again to France tomorrow, and one of the duties is to attend a 37-course lunch. Yes, 37, of 17th and 18th century food down in the country. I've developed a pretty good access there to aspects of their culture that don't appear in the New Yorker. Of course, the approach would be comic. If she didn't want the story, he wouldn't bother taking notes. Vaguely thinking that a doctor should be in attendance." Treisman was interested and agreed with Jim's latter concerns, hoping afterward that he had survived the meal and thought it a thrill to have the piece in the issue. The result, a really big lunch, was included in the magazine's September 6, 2004 issue and would earn a certain notoriety, as one critic put it, for its unapologetic description of excess, about which Jim remained thoroughly unrepentant. His defense, what little there was, relied mostly and characteristically on humor. While the lunch likely cost as much as a new Volvo station wagon, none of us 12 disciples of gourmandise wanted a new Volvo. We wanted only lunch, and since lunch lasted approximately 11 hours, we saved money by not having to buy dinner. It's a long road from a childhood in rural Michigan to being the sort of man who gets invited to a 37-course lunch, Jim would write in the New Yorker, though he'd return again and again in its narrative to his childhood memories as if pausing to measure the distance he had traveled. He took pride in his Midwestern upbringing, and it affected him permanently. He'd recall his astonishment as a young boy growing up in northern Michigan at the limitless appetites of his grandfather's pigs and the gospel assumption in the Calvinist Midwest that we eat to live, not live to eat. In describing a tort of pig's noses once prepared for him by Oberle, he observed how such food is usually only for the extremely curious or those with an agricultural background. Jim was both. He remembered his grandmother's boiling pig's heads with herbs and onions to make a head cheese of the cheek, tongue, and neck meat. It was a family specialty worthy of Oberle's menu. As a private joke, Oberle had arranged to have Minot serve fresh Baltic herring with mayonnaise, a staple food of Jim's Swedish relatives, because everyone knew that Jim had relished it since age 2. Who doesn't, right? As for his mother, Jim informed the reader she was a Swedish Lutheran who liked to ask her 5 children, "What have you accomplished today?" If I told her I had eaten 37 courses and drunk 13 wines, I would have been cast into outer darkness. But then this was the Iron Mom who also said with a tiny smile in reference to my life's work, "You've made quite a living out of your fibs." If his mother's comment seems barbed, she wasn't entirely wrong. At the time of his death in 2016, Jim counted over 30 books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry to his name. He had traveled a very long road indeed. All right, one more. We'll do one more here. Okay. Two more? One more. All right, here we go. So set the stage for this one. Let's see. Okay. It's November 1973. Jim has 2 novels under his belt. Wolf and A Good Day to Die. And he's working on Farmer. But he's still a pretty broke poet. Living in Michigan, getting really tired of the hard, difficult winters there and dreaming of Key West. And this passage, this chapter, this section is going to involve the movie Tarpon. And Tarpon, as some of you or many of you may know, is a documentary made by Guy Delavalden and Christian Adasso about Jim and Russell Chatham and Guy Delavalden and Jimmy Buffett's time in Key West fishing for tarpon and getting into trouble in town there. Tarpon just recently played over at the Shane Center, I think maybe last year, right? Or was it a documentary about Tarpon, which was a documentary about them. I think I got that right. Okay, so that's the stage. By November 1973, Jim had cut back on his drinking yet again. He felt less fuzzy, and he had apparently lost 15 pounds. His trip to Montana in August had been the high point of his 2 years, so he's living in Michigan now. And it helped to sustain him through the publication of his 2 books. Now, with yet another novel, Farmer, on the horizon, and a new long poem in the works, returning to earth, he felt a familiar unease. Dan Green of Simon & Schuster would write in the spring that he couldn't wait to see the new novel, and he was delighted that Jim was already deep into it. Kids, they're fucking tired of writing a book and worrying the next 10 months how it's going to be accepted when I have no control over it, Jim had griped to McGuane, Tom McGuane. McGuane was still worried about Jim's state of mind. He would be better off back at Stony Brook than to carry on with this moroseness, he told him, adding that he thought Jim the most gifted artist he ever knew. You'd better figure out wanting to leap from the station wagon because Wanda Wandell of the New York Times don't like your novel. You have to take some abrupt, rough grips on the situation, McGuane told him. As for Jim, he desperately wanted to get back to Key West with its white sand beaches and coconut palms. And he managed to do it the following spring. Go away a few weeks, come home, you meet your wife, and figure out why you've been married for 14 years. The food is grand, the daughter's lovely, sweet, and luminously bright, as the dogs are cranky and stupid. Key West, if anything, had grown wilder since he had begun going there, and the fat boys, as they were called, indulged in it all, infamously so. 2 years earlier, Jim had confessed that he wanted his future fishing adventures to be more joyful and less a therapeutic alternative to drinking. But maintaining that level of purity of sport proved challenging, especially as the lines between nightlife and daytime fishing became blurrier. The group of friends often went fishing well-equipped with booze packed in the coolers on the skiffs, usually a quart of rum and a 6-pack of Coca-Cola for mixing Cuba Libres. Mostly because of their proximity to Castro, only 90 miles away, it seemed appropriate, said Belden. As custom dictated, they would raise their cups above their heads before drinking. Drugs were not limited to the evenings either. In Jim's The Sporting Life, later published in Playboy, he described fishing 30 miles out in the Gulf from Key West near the Marquesas on a triple hit of cyclobin and a few joints of Colombian bud. Why get freaked or trip while you're fishing? He asked his readers. Why not? You only do so rarely. He fished to avoid boredom and the habitual, and drugs allowed him to vary the experience. Even McGuane, when he was on the island, had begun partying with the gang. With his hair grown down below his shoulders, he had adopted the nickname Captain Berserko, a sort of manic alter ego and a moniker that speaks for itself. That same March, Belden and his brother-in-law, Christian Adasso, began filming a documentary, Tarpon, that featured, in addition to the spectacular fish, Harrison, Brodigan, and McGuane, a host of local fishing guides, including Woody Sexton and Belden himself. Jimmy Buffett would score the film with original music. This will be a messy note because I'm thinking aloud and off the top of my head about your project Jim had written to Belden in February. He thought they could easily put together a shooting script in a few days or evenings, but he worried that Belden's original plan was a bit too orthodox to carry the weight of an hour. The initial idea had been to have the film take place within one 24-hour period, including an arrival and departure from the island by 2 anglers, and that without the filler, in Jim's words, included the whole experience of being on the island. People who fish tarpon with fly are rara avises. It's a pilgrimage, and the potentialities for the film are fabulous for presenting angling as a total experience, Jim imagined. Walking around drinking and eating in the evening is a vital part of it. Of course, you won't have any problems with the angling sequences and backdrops, the muds, barracudas, ballast, the lagoon on the Marquesas. Jim encouraged Valden to capture the melting pot aspects of Key West in the literary angle. He thought they might be able to get a few minutes with Tennessee Williams, who lived on the island. His bigger point was that the film needed to be entertaining, and so it should begin with sharks and Hemingway, he suggested. The almost overbearing macho aspects of it all are unnatural. Jim wanted the film to capture the real look and feel of their yearly ventures on the island, and that included the downtime, which he thought inextricably tied up with the fishing itself. Visualize Curtis, Woody, Henry Snow, Bob Montgomery, the fishing guides, being filmed, eating, and talking about tarpon at Louis' backyard. Get them boozed up first. The experience itself is so packed that it will, with luck, take care of itself, including the boredom, the wait, and the explosion, the excitement when the fish are spotted. No acting will be needed as the camera will be forgotten. Valden and Audasso took Jim's suggestion to heart. The resulting film, which wouldn't appear for another 2 years, was a sumptuous meditation on the beauty and fun of fly fishing for tarpon on the flats, and it's a melange of the elements Jim had recommended. Shot in the cinema verite style for which Audasso is well known, the film included stunning scenes of tarpon, quiet moments spent poling on the skiffs, interviews with guides, and recorded moments of Jim, Brodigan, McGuane, and Valden enjoying Key West. Russell Chatham was absent that year. The film also advocated, more or less tacitly, for the group's way of fishing, a quiet, graceful, almost spiritual practice combining art with great technical skill, the long drawn loops and silky ribbons of the fly casts, and an ethic of catch and release. This, in turn, was contrasted with the violent live bait fishing of the vulgar tourist-ridden charter boats. The film was, finally, an elegy of sorts for a way of life, both culturally and ecologically, that was already disappearing from the Keys. Set against the photography of the island's backcountry and Buffett's guitar, Jim was featured as the film's sole narrative voice and used the opportunity to reflect on writing, fishing, and the uniqueness of his island experience. You never see a painting that reminds you of what you see on the flats, Jim says at one point, where in one day the light changes thousands of times. And it's like Brodigan said, layers and layers, strata, lamina, and blues and greens, thousands of variations on the bottom from turtle grass, the coral, to clear sand. The film, hardly ever shown and forgotten for years, enjoyed a new life many years after its creation. It has become an unmistakable homage to the gang of friends in their younger years, hungry, joyful, wild, and inevitably impermanent.
Thank you, Todd. Can everybody hear me in the back? Just want to make sure that we're good there. Fantastic, thank you, got a thumbs up. First of all, I want to thank you very much for that reading. And I want to ask everyone to appreciate the amount of research that those 15 minutes took. What we heard was 7 years of work, just essentially given to us. And the format for this evening's, the rest of the event is I'm going to get into a conversation with Todd for a little bit of time. And then when it feels appropriate, we'll open it up for questions from the floor. And thank you for being up there too. I'll try to make eye contact up there. But I also want to observe that I spoke with a lot of people prior to the event starting, and many people, and I noted that you almost went there, has a Jim Harrison voice imitation. I think he, like Bob Dylan, might have, and Christopher Walken, there's just such a, people really want to try that. So if you, I want to take a little straw poll here. Raise your hand if you have ever tried to speak like Jim Harrison. All right. Okay. That's good.
There's going to be, I think we're going to have a contest later as part of a pub crawl. So we can take it on the road.
So the first question that I want to ask is a very broad question to get you talking, Todd.
Yes, Joseph.
Also I want to say, this is the book launch for this extraordinary biography. The book is available back there. It pubbed only 2 days ago, and the audiobook already exists. So if you like listening to your books, please download the audio. What is it like to be in a room in Jim's hometown with 1,000 friends, and you are now the esteemed expert on Jim Harrison?
It's terrifying. Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. Yeah, I mean, it's an honor is what it is, and it's a humbling experience. And people have said, "Oh, the Montana, this event in Livingston, that's the easy one." And I said, "No, that's the hard one." I was like, "You got to be kidding me! Everybody there knows Jim, right? If I'm in a community with anonymity, that would be much easier to swing. But here, everyone will call me out if I'm wrong, and so you got to be really careful to be right."
Yeah, I noticed no one.
But it's an honor.
Yeah,
is what it really is. And I thank you again.
And the other interesting thing I was thinking as Todd was reading was that all of your stories intersect with this biography somewhere. And while your name might not be in it, your story is, because no doubt you met Jim in person. You certainly met him on the page. And that's just this wonderful, wonderful thing. And so, Todd, there is a game that is played on NPR called Wild Card. And while driving here from Port Townsend, Washington to Livingston, Montana, I thought of 1,000 questions, and I distilled them down into 3 batches of 3 cards each. So you get to choose from batch 1, card 1, card 2, or card 3. And I will read the question.
I could still do an interpretive dance. Pretty much beeline for the wine table, I think might be my number 1 option. I'll do 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
So question number 3.
Yeah.
During your research, what were some surprises?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this, not surprisingly, a couple times already. Just one of the big surprises for me was just Jim's level of friendship, the number of friendships he had, just how social he was for what you might think of otherwise as a solitary poet. And I know Jim really went through deeply solitary times, dark periods, depressing times when he felt very alone. But I was always impressed from the beginning to the end of just how much he put himself out there and made friends with people. His profession, not just people, but professional relationships in publishing, in film, and he had a knack for pulling people close to him and endearing himself to them and winning them over into incredibly devoted friendships. And I mean, this is both this sort of a continual surprise for me. It's also sort of, it's the challenge of writing this book because he wrote so much to so many people and had so much correspondence that when I spent 6 months at his archive at Grand Rapids, Grand Valley State University outside of Grand Rapids, and reams and reams and reams of written correspondence. And he wrote to everybody. He became really good friends with his psychologist, his psychiatrist in New York. And they would write about books and movies and food and share recipes. And he just had this absolutely unbelievable knack for making friendships. And it's pretty remarkable. I mean, these guys, a lot of the guys that he was really close friends with are, these, sort of at first glance are sort of rugged outdoorsmen. And at a time, I think, in this country where you hear a lot about the solitary male and people who are isolated and not reaching out and making friends with other men in particular, Jim was complete opposite of that. He had so many friendships and he cultivated so many friendships and he sustained so many friendships throughout his life. He worked at them. And not everyone was always happy with him, but he was great at making friends and keeping them, and he made an effort. He hunted, he fished with them, he cooked with them, he visited with them, traveled with them. Friendship was a tremendously big part of his life that never ceased to astonish me and inspire me, frankly.
So before we go to batch 2, just following up on the friendships, one of the things that is notable, if you've ever seen the bibliography for Jim Harrison, the first part of it, Elk River is actually going to publish the second part of the bibliography. There is a massive section of blurbs that Jim Harrison gave to mostly young writers. Anytime that he could support a young writer, he gave it. I don't know how many blurbs there are, hundreds and hundreds of blurbs. And it's very fascinating to actually read those blurbs. So to your point about friendship and cultivating friendships, he would get a letter from Hitler and Jan explaining the project. And more often than not, he was incredibly generous. And I love that aspect of him. That was a good answer.
Thank you, Joseph.
You've earned batch 2. All right, Todd. Batch 2 in these questions. Question 1, 2, or 3?
I'll stick with 3.
All right.
Joseph.
Fair enough. Okay. Were there areas of research that you were afraid to open? Go on to batch 3. No,
I picked 3 because Jim liked odd numbers, and so I couldn't pick an even number. I'll probably always stick with 3. That I was afraid to open?
that you were afraid to go into.
There were batches of research that I wanted to get into, that I couldn't always get into, yes. And that began with Jim's correspondence with Tom McWayne, which had been restricted for many, many years. And after a lot of sort of pleading and cajoling, Tom was kind enough to sort of just throw the doors open to that correspondence. And that I felt was, I felt incredibly lucky and fortunate to be able to read that correspondence. It took me months to read it because they corresponded for something like 5 decades. And so that was, that made the book in many ways, to have that record, that tremendous correspondence record between 2 very good friends, lifelong friends, right? Jim thought of Tom as one of his oldest friends, and he was. And so that was a real treat. I don't know that there was anything I was afraid to go into. There was just stuff I wanted to get into, and eventually mostly did.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
While you're on the correspondence and getting access to correspondence, can you speak to what I think is the most extraordinary literary archive in the country? Can you speak a little bit about Grand Valley State University, how the archive was created, how it came about? Yeah,
so a lot of Jim's papers were scattered around. Some were, I think, initially at MSU, but they were scattered around, and Hank Meyer of Meyer's grocery stores in the Midwest was a big Jim Harrison fan, and literally bought up all of his papers and had them deposited at Grand Valley State University in just outside Grand Rapids. And if I'm lucky to get access to some tremendous correspondence for this book, I was equally lucky to have those papers at Grand Valley. Grand Valley is the kind of archive you really want to be in. It's small, intimate. You get to know the librarians. There's no one looking over your shoulder. I've been in archives, right, where they'll let you take like 6 photographs a day if you're on good behavior, and then you have to like stop for tea time. I'm not even kidding, and like have tea with other researchers there, and then you can go back, and it's so regimented. And there were so many documents in this collection that if I had to work under those circumstances, I mean, it would be another 5 years. And Grand Valley, not that they're ever lax, I mean, they're very professional about it, but tremendously, unspeakably helpful in giving me access and retrieving papers and making photocopies. It was just a real joy to be there. Jim's archive is an astonishing place. People have called it sort of, almost for Harrison fans, people have gone there and it's almost like a pilgrimage for them to go there and to spend time in this absolutely incredible archive with hundreds of boxes of correspondence, dozens and dozens of boxes of personal papers, professional correspondence, film scripts, manuscripts, you name it. And for a biographer, that can be a curse and a blessing, right? Because you have to, if you're following sort of the biographer's credo, which Robert Caro, the famous biographer of Lyndon Johnson, said, you turn every page. Okay? I think there's a documentary out about him called Turn Every Page. And if you even try to attempt to turn every page, I mean, you're never going to get out of there. And it was a real challenge, but ultimately a blessing.
That's fantastic. The one thing I do want to add to that story is Jim's brother, older brother, was a librarian, and early on in Jim's literary career, he was told to save everything. And then he diligently did save everything. And then when Jim hired Joyce Bailey as his assistant, it came to Joyce to save everything and send it along to David. And David kept it organized and kept it in great shape for Hank Meyer to do the purchase and the sale. But if ever you're in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and you have some time, wow, and you're a Harrison fan, just go to that archive. It is incredible.
I've been asked a number of times, why did he save everything? He saved so much material, and I think his brother John, being a librarian, was a big part of it.
Sorry, John.
John was the librarian. He's the one who really, I think, he. But I was talking to his one of Jim's famous, well-known magazine editors, Terry McDonald, one time in New York when I was interviewing him, and he asked me, so why do you think Jim kept all that material anyway? And I said, I think his brother John, encouraged him. He goes, ego. And I thought, there's something to that. I think Jim, from early on, he was absolutely determined to become a famous writer, and I don't think he had any doubts. I think he knew he was going to be a famous writer, and he wanted to save everything for posterity.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Last batch 3. What are you going with? 1, 2, or 3?
I'm going to stick with 3.
All right,
Joseph.
All right, straight flush. How did your appreciation of Jim's books shift or grow during your research?
Yeah, so I started reading Jim before, or just when I started college back in the mid-'90s in New York, and someone turned me on to Legends of the Fall, maybe just soon before or right around when the movie came out. And I was hooked on Legends, and sort of, I went back to the beginning and read Jim's early novels and read all the way through most of his novels, and then onto his poetry and then onto his nonfiction. And so by the time I came around to writing this, I was already, a pretty devoted Harrison reader, and I'd read a lot of his works. But I think inevitably, and this is my big hope for the biography, right, is that it provides sort of some substantial deep dive into his life that's going to newly inform fans, readers who had already read a lot of his works, but and they can turn to those works with fresh eyes. And for me, it was always just enhanced by the research, by the context, and by the life, and by his unbelievable work ethic, the amount of work he did with such incredible dedication, astonishing work ethic. I think when he once glanced at his bibliography, and we have Jim Harrison's bibliographer here in the audience, sitting right here, Greg Orr. I can't remember how many citations. There's like 7,000 citations in the first one or something. I can't remember. Maybe more than that.
6,500 roughly.
Okay, 6,500. He said he looked at it. He could not believe how many citations he had. He said, I have a new epitaph. He says, he got his work done, was the epitaph. And his mom would have been proud of him because he just produced so much work. And so to answer your question, I think absolutely. It just like I hope reading the biography does, doing the research just enhanced his works so much for me, and revisiting them with fresh eyes.
Final question, bonus round. I'm going to choose the question. I know, it's scary. What were some of your memorable interviews and why?
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus here, but I could. I'm not going to do that. But I do have one distinct memory that stands out. I feel like a lot of this book, a good portion of this book was written during the pandemic, and I feel like I was always on the road. I was driving to Michigan and spending weeks or months out there. I was driving to Montana. I was driving to Arizona during snowstorms with Danny Laren. I was driving out to California, New York, and going all over the place. And a lot of it was done during COVID, and I remember I finally sort of settled on getting an interview with the poet Gary Snyder. And he was going to have me come out to California, but it was during COVID, and he called, and I'm driving from Michigan, and I'm like heading out to California. He calls me and he says, we're going to have to do this by phone. My family caught wind of it. We can't be in the same room. And I said, okay, of course I understand. And he says, call me tomorrow or the day after and we'll do it. And so I'm driving, and I decided to listen to Jack Kerouac's Dharma Bums. And Gary Snyder, the poet, is the model for Joffrey Ryder, right, who is the sort of Kerouac's inspiration in Dharma Bums. And so I'm listening to it, and Snyder starts texting me. And he's asking me questions, and we're having a conversation by text. And I'm listening to Dharma Bums and Joffrey Ryder climbing up the mountain doing this. I'm like, this is completely surreal. I'm having a text conversation with Joffrey Ryder driving across the country. I said, this is just one of these moments, that I'm never going to forget. And then I ended up having just a spectacular interview with Gary, and that stands out.
So what made it spectacular?
She's Joffrey Ryder. I mean, I was talking, and not only that, I'm texting. Who would have ever thought that Joffrey Ryder would be texting me, right? I mean, I still can't get my mind around that. So, I would say that's, and he's a hero of mine. So,
Joffrey Ryder or Gary Snyder?
Gary Snyder.
I see. Fair enough. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, shout it out. I'll repeat it in the microphone so people in the back can hear. Anybody with any questions? Or
I'm guessing you never met Jim Harrison.
I did not.
the question, hold on. Go ahead.
The question is, what difference did that make?
So the question is, first question was, did Todd ever meet Jim Harrison? And the second part of that question is, what was it? How did you phrase it?
What difference?
What difference does that make?
I mean, it's a really important question. I feel like it's almost impossible to answer because I don't know what the other experience would have been. I only know what my experience would have been, was. I can imagine how it would be different. I like to think that it gave me some distance, critical distance, and some objectivity. I was already a big reader of Harrison, and so I was inclined to really like him already, and it would have been very different, I think, if I had known him. It would be a different book, I think, and I guess it depends on how well I knew him. But I also think most biographers don't know their subjects. People write books about Thomas Jefferson and don't know him, right? And so, in a weird way, it gave me. I think it gave me some objectivity and distance that was probably pretty good for a biographer, I suspect. Yeah.
Great. Anyone from the balcony? Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Rilke and Harrison in the past few months, and it's been said of Rilke, I guess, that he had an ecstasy of aloneness. And you started out this lecture talking about the solitude of Harrison, but quickly shifted into his friendships. And so I wanted to know how you kind of circle that square. How do you suppose one cultivates deliberate solitude amidst maintaining good friendship, particularly to the degree of a writer?
That's a great question, and
Hold on. Did everybody in the back hear that question?
Yes.
So the question is how does one maintain solitude while also cultivating deep and lasting friendships? Is that a fair estimation?
That's the great distillation, yeah.
I think for Jim it was habits and rituals. I think you talk to a lot of people about Jim, and they say he was a creature of habit. Right? He showed up at the bar every night at what is it, 411, 403, 407. Is that it? Okay, yeah, I knew it was an odd number, not an even number. And so what does that mean? I mean, you have to be alone to write, and Jim needed to be alone to write, and he needed that solitude to produce the work that he produced, but he was able to stop himself and get out, and for someone who was prone to excess, and excessive work, certainly, he was going to go out, right? He was going to make time to be social, and I think that became an ingrained pattern for him throughout his life. And maybe absolutely essential to sort of sustain him mentally, physically, and sustain the work output, I think.
Wonderful. Is there a question in the back? Yeah.
You go these first. No, go ahead. Well, I have a question for you, Joseph.
Uh-oh. Right on, Mark.
Can you tell us a little bit about just the process or the experience of being Jim's poetry to edit those poems and
Sure.
to work with him on the books?
Thank you for the question. The question is how did Jim and I work together on his poems and his poetry books? The most important thing to remember is that I valued the work incredibly deeply, so I came to each poem with a seriousness and zero ego. And the method was that he would write poems and he would send them to me, and he also had an email list of lots of, I think maybe 20 at the end, of people who would get these poems hot out of the oven. And I'd receive them, and my memo or my MO was to not respond other than say, hey, I got your poem, thanks, nice. And I put it in a file, and then the file would grow and it would get a certain kind of density. And then he and I would communicate and say, it looks like we're getting enough poems to think about a book. And then I would go to either Livingston or Patagonia, and he and I would spend 2 days together. I would have done line edits on all the poems. So the first day was spent on line edits, and then also deciding which poems were in or out. And that often sloughed into a second day. And then the second day was usually spent structuring the book. And my rule was, and I mentioned this in the article in the Enterprise, is what I told him every time is, I am just your last best reader before you go public. You're the artist. All decisions are yours. What I've done is I've read the poems as well as I can. I'm providing editorial comments as well as I can. They're your decisions to make. And we would go through poem by line, poem by poem, and make those decisions. And I always budgeted in pushback. I always knew there would be pushback, and that's okay, I don't mind. But it was always a joy at the end of the process when we got, literally, there's an image I have of down in Arizona at Hard Luck Ranch, Jim on his hands and knees, kind of managing the papers to create the document, and seeing this long river of paper, and we finally got it, and then I just carefully stacked the pages and numbered them so we would have them in order, and he smacks the manuscript and like, let's go out to dinner. It's like, okay. Yeah, another book in the books. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Yes.
Awesome. Another question? Yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier, thanks for being here, Todd.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's really great. You had said something about reading his fiction, and then his poetry and his nonfiction. Do you think that order had some impact on you, or is that something that might be an inclusion in your biography? I mean, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Other than 16 languages, that was another question, but I was saying that you had read originally his fiction, then his poetry, then his nonfiction. I'm very curious, in what order that might affect the way you understand him.
The question.
I know that's kind of a hard question.
Yeah. The question is Todd said that he read the fiction, poetry, and nonfiction essentially in that order, and the question is generally how did that affect his relationship with the work?
His perception of how he might perceive him, and to write him.
His perception of how he's perceived.
And to put it in the book as well.
Yeah, that's a tough question, and it would be subtle. I mean, I think when I got to his poetry, which I think is much more personal, it certainly, I think I looked back at his fiction with fresh eyes, sort of retrospectively, after reading his poems, which were tremendously more, much more personal, much more intimate. sort of exploration of himself and his history and his of consciousness and his experiences. And so I think I look back at his fiction with fresh eyes. And so it informed my understanding of him, certainly in really different and expansive ways. And then I think it was maybe more, it was a sort of different, jarring experience to read his essays. And I'm trying to think back to like how I felt when I was first reading these. But, you know, there's obviously a lot of overlap between all the work, but Jim's journalism is where he really cultivated this sort of persona of Jim Harrison, someone, sort of a lifestyle influencer. And I really do think, yeah, Jim was a lifestyle influencer. I mean, he was telling you how to drive across country, right? This is how you do it. And he would literally go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You got to get used to bad food, and this is the hardest part, right? And he'd say, don't take highways, take back roads, and he would lay out this whole sort of program for how one drives across the country. And so it was sort of a jarring experience to sort of go and transition from this sort of very intimate poetry to this creation of this lifestyle influencer persona that Harrison cultivated, and so many people find fascinating, and I do too. But and I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not quite sure, right? How it.
I don't know if it's an answerable question, really.
Yeah, it's like imperceptible. I'm sure it did something to me, and I really have to think about it.
No, I think the way you looked at the fiction after the poetry probably made a big difference to you. He was translated into 16 languages. Am I correct?
That sounds about right to me. No,
like that.
More.
Maybe more.
Yeah.
So when he was translated into, say, French or Spanish or Afghani, for that matter, was there a preference in those publication times that particular work was reviewed, and then there was a preference toward, say, fiction poetry? And it's just, I was curious to see where other countries had come from in terms of what they wanted to read, especially.
The question is about translation. Can you distill that down for folks in the back?
Well, that's a good point.
Right.
Yeah, the translation issue is huge.
Translation. The issues about translation. Jim was translated into the poetry and the fiction, and probably the nonfiction, translated into at least 16 different languages. And the question is about translation.
Yeah, agreed.
Right, and if there was a preference for what was read in translation, is that right? I mean, I'd like to kick. Joseph might have something to say about this, actually. I'd be curious. I mean, what do you know about the translation? Not to put you on the spot, but was there...
I feel very on the spot.
I suspect his fiction was translated a lot more than his poetry was.
Absolutely.
But absolutely, hands down.
He had a French translator who essentially specialized in his work in France and felt very comfortable with that. And there are some French translations of the poetry, both in single volumes, and there's a kind of a very slender selected poems of Jim in French. And I know he was translated into Finnish and into Italian and into Spanish, et cetera, et cetera. So, in Finnish. Did I say Finnish? I think I said Finnish.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question, and it's got to be a really good question. Not that these other ones haven't been phenomenal. Yeah. What's that?
I don't know if it's a really good question, but if you look at Off to the Side, his autobiography, compared to, say, a biography, do you have anything to say about the difference between the autobiographies and biographies?
So the question is, Jim wrote a memoir called Off to the Side, and the question is when you compare the memoir to the biography, how does it compare and contrast? Is that a fair?
Or just anything you have to say about the differences between those two genres?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as a biographer, I think you think of autobiography, what is the evidentiary or what kind of value is looking at an autobiography? And really, I've always thought that an autobiography is evidence of what the author thought of themselves at the time and or how they wanted to present themselves at a particular point in time. And which isn't to say that there's not a lot of factual details in his memoir. There is, but it's more about the presentation and how the author or subject presented themselves at that point in time, how they wanted to be perceived or how they perceived themselves. I always thought of Jim's Off to the Side as very much sort of in the voice and style of his journalism. In fact, a lot of the chapters in that book were pre-published in magazines. And so I hear that sort of oracular lifestyle influencer voice in Jim's nonfiction in Off to the Side more than, say, his poetry voice. He doesn't even spend a lot of time talking about his poetry in there. He talks about Hollywood a lot, talks about his childhood, and I think those are really valuable pages in that book about when he's reflecting on his childhood and such like that. But it's not going to the sort of intimate level that his poetry did and does. And so for me, I mean, it was certainly important to read, but it wasn't, I'm not going to obviously take it at face value. Anything he says in the face value, anything he says, I have to verify and double check, right? And the whole presentation, you always have to be suspect and suspicious of any presentation in an autobiography because it's a performance at the end of the day, I think.
Well, to close, I want to thank you all for being here, for being attentive and asking good questions. Thank you for helping launch this extraordinary biography, Devouring Time. We do have copies in the back for sale. Todd, afterward, will be sitting at this table to sign them. Do you have something to say, Mark, or do we have to?
I just have a warning for everyone.
Okay, there's a warning. It's a structural warning.
Just that when we're done, when we say thank you, and then there's riotous applause, don't rush up here until I move the tech out of your way to get your book signed by Todd. So, slowly make your way up to get your book signed. Okay, that's all.
It would be a great story if, I can see the headline, book owner gets trampled, right? And rushed to signing table.
Strangled by Mike Cable.
That might be good media for the book, so I don't know.
Okay, well in that case, do whatever you want.
Thank you so much for coming.